Good afternoon, folks. We're just letting everybody in and then we'll make a start. We're just giving everyone a little bit time to just get everybody in. Just going to give everyone just another minute or so, just so that we get everyone in the meeting. Good afternoon in the meantime. What is the most sunniest October I've ever seen in my whole life? And I'm old, so that's quite a long time. But it's about 24 degrees in London, I think, today, which is unbelievable for October. You can tell I'm British, talk about the weather while we're waiting. We've just got a few more. We're just letting in the room. Just hearing the beep beeps coming in. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. We will get started. We're going to give everyone just one more minute and then we'll make a start. Got quite a lot of people still to arrive, but I won't hold you too long. It's their fault for being slightly late. So let's make a start and we'll continue to let people in. Good afternoon, as I've said. I'm Mel Forbes, MD of APSCo OutSource. Welcome to this webinar in partnership with Giant Screening. They're an outsourced trusted partner who you probably all know, but they're the fastest growing screening provider in the UK. And Giant Screening, of course, part of Giant Group. Today, we're going to look at and discuss the considerations for managed service providers when reviewing their screening services. Now, we expect there to be lots of questions on this topic, so please send them via the Q&A. You'll have already realised that you're muted, but the Q&A button is free for everybody, or the chat, whichever you prefer, and we will make sure we have time near the end to cover them off. But the things we want to cover today, just so you make sure you're in the right webinar, is that we want to look at the different types of onboarding and pre-employment models that are available, and the benefits and drawbacks of those, providing screening services globally, and again, benefits and challenges of that, how you can achieve speed and manage costs, and does one take precedent over the other? The future of screening, what innovations are being delivered out there, kind of what's next in this market. But let me start by introducing the folks from Giant Screening, and I'm going to hand over first to Matt Armstrong. So Matt, over to you.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, hi everyone, thanks for joining. So yeah, I'm Matt Armstrong. I'm the CEO at Giant Screening. I guess you'll say I'm a bit of an industry veteran. I've been saying 15 years in the industry for the last 5 or 6 years now, so I'm going to have to go with 20 now. Happy to take you all through this today. Conscious of time, so it will be kind of, I guess, an overview. As Dan would attest, I could probably keep you here for a day or two talking about screening, but I'll try really not to. So yeah, welcome everyone. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hi, everybody. Dan Haslam, Group Sales Director for Giant. So I've kind of got oversight over all the different sales areas of the business and the different product lines. So Matt's absolutely right. You will talk about screening forever, so it's good we've got him on a tight rein today. I think my role with MSP clients of ours is really just helping them leverage value out of their programs, whether that's on the screening piece, the payroll side of it, both in the UK and internationally. So yeah, looking forward to having today's session and getting going. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you. So I've prepared some questions for Matt and Dan, but as I've said, we'll have plenty of time to pose the questions that you have, and I much prefer your questions to mine because they kind of know what's coming from me, but when it's your questions, they've got to think on their feet. So let's really test Matt on whether he could talk about screening for days. Let's do it. Let's see if he really is a veteran in this space. So Matt, coming to you first. Kick us off really. What are the different types of onboarding and pre-employment models available today? And can you give us an idea of the benefits and potential drawbacks of those, please?
Yeah, sure. So if we look at I think there's 4 different types. I think more widely people accept 3, but there is a 4th, which I'll cover. And those four to me is there's the in-house model, managed service model, there's a service model, and the hybrid model, which is kind of I guess a newer innovation out there on the hybrid one, which is a bit tech led, but I'll cover that off. And to look at each one individually as to where the benefits and the challenges are within those. So the in-house model, it does what it says on the tin. It's where an MSP conducts all of the background checks themselves using their own staff, their own resources, their own tech, etc. And that has some good benefits. You get increased control over the process. You can customize to a better level to meet the specific requirements. And I guess you get a great flexibility in terms of turnaround, because turnaround is something that is always incredibly important, no more so in the MSP market. And you can prioritize to achieve those turnaround times. Now, the negatives, I guess, or the drawbacks, and I guess it's a bit contentious for me to say it's more expensive. Most people would think in-house is actually cheaper. We've done a lot of ROIs on this. It's not on there, and it's certainly more time consuming. It needs specialised staff and resources, so often there isn't the nucleus, I guess, of experience and expertise in there. And there's also more of a challenge about having the access to the latest tech that's out there as well to run this. So that's the in-house model. Then the managed service model, which obviously I'm a huge fan of, where a company partners with a third party, a screening provider, to conduct the checks on their behalf. The benefits around that is it is undoubtedly more cost effective than in-house. Scale invariably is. There's no need to invest in that in-house resource because the expertise comes, the people come with it. Generally, what you can access from a data perspective, and then we'll go on to talk maybe later on a bit about global, but both sort of domestic and globally, there's a much wider range of services that you can get. The impacts that you feel through peaks and troughs are flatlined, doesn't affect the MSP. It just allows, I guess, the MSP to focus on their core business. Clearly, the converse of that is there's a bit less control over the process. The customization level may be limited, and there may not be that amount of flexibility in turnaround times. I promise you, Mel, this is my longest answer of all because this is setting the scene a bit. So then you've got the as a service model, and this is where you take a piece of outside tech, so a background checking platform, to conduct your checks on. Benefits: it's scalable and it is cost effective. It's easy enough to use and manage, and you don't need to invest in hardware or software internally, and you should be getting the latest tech constantly. The drawback is it won't be as customizable as you want, and it still requires, generally speaking, your own in-house resource and the expertise, because knowing the market out there, not many of the organizations, I guess, that license background checking platform, the expertise in the actual background checking. And the one thing that I would say, which is probably fairly contentious, is when you're choosing a platform, don't believe the hype on automation. Most will have this, it's completely automated. I can promise you it's not. At max, it's 40 to 50% automation. The rest is your team's sitting behind it, but still a great way to go. And then the final one is hybrid, and this can be a really good option. So from that, what I'd say is it combines the benefits of in-house and managed service. So in essence, what hybrid is saying, right, we've got it in-house, we can do the most of it, but actually we want a managed service provider to maybe see us through those peaks in our recruitment, or maybe there's some more complex stuff that we can't do that we want to partner with in it as well. It gives them all the benefits of that managed service and the in-house in one. The drawbacks on that, I guess it can be a bit more complex to manage than the other models, and may require slightly more resource because of that. Promise that was the longest answer, Mel.
Well, you say it's the longest answer, but I wanted to just say, are there any other considerations for choosing the model?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you need to think about what's going to be the most compliant for you as well. So look at the compliance element, as screening long ago stopped being a domestic product. It's a global product, always is. So being understanding the compliance globally can be really difficult. Whichever one you do, there's no room for error in background checking. It needs to be accurate and reliable. Think about your drivers. Are your drivers the turnaround time? If it is, you need to pick the best model or the best partner that can drive those numbers for you. At the top of every list that we speak to is candidate experience. So what does that look like? Often an in-house model will struggle with a good candidate experience because it's tech driven, but it's thinking about that all the way through. What industries you serve into is really important. So are you serving into regulated industries? Financial services, for example, is heavily regulated, but it's incredibly different. Doing airside checks is important. Budget, clearly the cost implications come in, and then looking at your clients' requirements. Many clients, even if let's take financial services, you can have 10 financial services companies with 5 different requirements. So can the model that you choose cope with them in there as well?
Right. So Matt, in terms of you saying there's kind of those 4 key models, I guess, Dan, coming to you, what do you typically see in the market in how checks are currently delivered?
Thanks, Mel. It's obviously a mixture, isn't it? Yeah. So the different businesses operating in different ways, and in fact, if you keep an eye on an MSP business for a prolonged period of time, you'll probably see them going through a circle. As many of them have built up their own capabilities in-house, having originally started outsourcing. Then they've built out their own service teams. They've brought software in, and then start to think full circle again. So I don't think it's easy to say, there's one particular way of working. I think for every business it's slightly different, and there's a constant review going on of what's right for them at a certain point in time. I think when you look at, in particular, MSP programs, if the screening element of that onboarding isn't centralized within the MSP provider themselves, then often they'll look to the second tier recruitment suppliers who are involved in that supply chain, and ask those guys to also do referencing for the workers that are going through sort of through that route if they've done the search and selection. And I think that's quite interesting. There's models that we operate now where we work with some of our MSP partners where actually we look to aggregate that screening away from those second tier providers and put it into Matt's area, because Matt's got the expertise. Matt can make sure that the delivery is super slick, rather than necessarily pushing it out to the second tier agencies who they want to focus on search and selection and get that done, and the screening piece often becomes a little bit of an add-on. For some businesses, we see in that particular scenario that they'll actually lean on the recruitment consultants to do the check-in, with mixed results. I think it'd be fair to say that the consultants don't really want to be spending time on detail and going through that process. So there's some nice benefits to the recruitment businesses to look at aggregating that into a specialised screening provider. Obviously, if you've not got the right people focused on it, as Matt said, you need people with expertise that are delivering these screening checks. Otherwise, you're going to be adding days onto that time to hire, which is clearly a main KPI that an end hirer engagement with an MSP will be focused on. So super important to make sure that efficiency is trying to be washed out where possible. Most of the businesses who are looking at trying to deliver it in-house will often be using a software product which they won't necessarily own. And to Matt's point, it's difficult then to be able to bespoke that and try and tailor these products. So that can start to create more and more inefficiency in the process. So it's horses for courses. I think often that control element that Matt touched on is a key driver for how businesses are going to build out their own model, and sometimes seems that control trumps delivery in certain occasions, and if at least if it's our mistakes we're making or it's our slow process, it's one that we're in control of, and there's a reluctance to outsource that. But without throwing Matt under the bus, I'd say same with any supplier. If you can be really clear on SLAs and performance metrics and maybe have some accountability in contracts around that, Matt, then people should be less worried about those points.
Because we are obviously talking about managed service providers in this scenario, obviously suppliers, third-party suppliers are a huge factor in that. How do you think they can help or indeed hinder the process? Because certainly in my experience, whoever supplies the candidate is typically the ones that do the screening. So, yeah, what would you say about that, Dan?
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, traditionally, that is the expectation, isn't it? I think if the MSP has a supplier that's providing a candidate, often it's the screening requirement goes in hand with that. But we'd really like to challenge that, and we do challenge that. Actually, is that appropriate? What's the impact then on for the MSP in terms of the amount of auditing that needs to take place to make sure that these second-tier suppliers are delivering the screening accurately and they're delivering it quick enough and in line with expectations? So it does put a lot more pressure on those suppliers. I think when you speak to the suppliers, they might not always be overt with the MSPs. Maybe they are. I don't know, but they'll often moan about the expectation and the pressure that's put upon them for a variety of different things, not just screening. So I think there is some benefit in sort of taking some of those services away from them and aggregating it, whether it's into the MSP centrally or doing it via an outsourced arrangement potentially. As we said before, recruitment consultants in those second-tier suppliers inevitably are going to get involved in doing those checks, and it's not their bag. Generally speaking, they'll see it as a distraction from the main workload. So if the second-tier supplier's got their own dedicated screening operation, then perhaps it is appropriate. But I think it's just a case of horses for courses.
Okay. All right. Yep. So looking at screening on a global scale, Matt, what do you think are the benefits or indeed the greatest challenges that the business face?
Yeah, I think from a benefits perspective, globally as well as domestically, it extends the protection that you're offering to the employers that are going up. So it's impossible to really know that the individual that's being positioned with an organisation is truly clear without progressing that out globally on there. Now, traditional, so some things should always have no barriers. Things like referencing, education, etc., things like that. It should always have no barriers. But there's more of a barrier or a perceived barrier when it comes to things like criminal record, financial background, etc., and things like that. But it's really important to do because from an MSP's perspective, it reduces their liability. So they're less likely in 6 months' time to find out someone's committed a heinous fraud within the organisation, and actually we could have known about that on there. So it then sort of like rolls into improving the decision-making process because you know what you know in there. And the reputation of the MSP with the client as well is incredibly important. The crux of, I guess, global screening often is you just don't have a choice. You've got to do it. And a lot of people struggle with it because understanding where the data is, how it's obtained. I mean, if we think, I think it's something like 207 sovereign states globally. That's 207 different types of criminal record check. Well, actually, if we take into account America, that's another 52 different types. Same with the credit bureaus. Our credit bureau is available, so it can get really quite complex. And I guess that goes on to the challenges as well about how complex it can be. Some more of the challenges are that there's, the transient workforce, the nature of the workforce in general. You need to understand the laws and the regulations in all recruiting, and also from where that candidate may have originated or travelled or stayed or worked, etc., and things like that. There's the obvious language barriers If you're looking for a criminal record check in Azerbaijan, they don't take kindly to try to do it in English. They prefer it in local language. So there's the challenge there. Cost is a barrier, and it's something that really needs to be understood with your clients on day one, that cost will be filtered up, because whereas in the UK, we could be looking at between £30 and £40 for a criminal record check, I know for a fact Japan's about 350. So it can be quite a significant cost differential, which normally isn't baked into your fees at day one. And then there's the time to hire. Now, the time to hire can be massively impacted by overseas checks. Again, we'll use domestic. So criminal record checks in the UK, we average just around 0.9 of a day to conduct them. If I went to somewhere outside of the UK in a less developed nation, I could be looking at 25 to 30 days. Now, that may impact your hiring decision, knowing that we've got 30 days to wait for that. So it's knowing that up front and understanding how that works.
Got it. Dan, anything you'd like to add to that, to Matt's points on that?
From a global perspective, I think it's definitely something that we're all looking at more and more. Obviously, the talent shortages are forcing businesses to look further afield. I've been over in Ireland and Netherlands recently, and it's not a UK thing. This is a European piece at the very least, and I'm sure potentially worldwide. All these businesses are having to look further afield for talent to get into hirers. And so from a group perspective, obviously, for screening to operate internationally is fantastic, but also for us, looking at operating internationally into payroll, if you get, screening wrong, it's a problem. If you get worker classification wrong and you're engaging workers in the wrong way, then that's also particularly perilous as well. I think when we looked at the international market from a payroll perspective, a lot of the providers that are out there very much sort of built up a solution which is focused on perm hiring. When you start applying contracting to that, it doesn't really work as well. So I think it's super, super important that businesses have got the right sort of providers in place that understand the global market and can react really quick, because the time to hires now, I heard recently, the average time to hire is up at nearly 40 days, which for perm, that's a long time. For contractors, that just absolutely doesn't work. So you need to make sure that whether it's employment checking or any part of that process, it is super, super slick. Otherwise, you're going to get bottlenecks and your clients are going to be not happy.
Absolutely. So that brings us nicely on to this dilemma: speed and cost. And, does one take precedent over the other? Matt, what tips do you have for us on speed and managing cost? How do you achieve that?
So I think it's all around efficiency. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. You don't have to have high cost to get speed. It's a bit of a boring answer. It's process, which is not the most exciting of things, but it literally is. I mean, if we think about every element of the screening process, if I think about, I don't know, a reference request, one single reference, there's probably 20 or 30 different variables that can happen during that referencing process. On the outside, it looks like a really simple process. Oh, I just send the system will send an email to get a reference. It's really not. There's that many variables. And if we then go, well, we're doing 10 different types of checks for this individual, plus 3 to 4 references, the amount of variables is huge. So the real key, and this comes back to the point I made earlier about sometimes with the in-house model struggling on expertise, is understanding every one of those variables, understanding when they're likely to happen and what the next variable is. So those processes need to be mapped end to end for the individuals carrying out the screening to know exactly and to be able to react. If X happens, I do Y. Or to even be able to preempt that. I mean, we do a huge amount of, as you'd imagine, being part of the giant group, we do a huge amount of contractor screening. That's very different to perm screening. Around that, it's very different to gig screening. They're all different types of scenarios. So the thing that I would recommend, if my one main tip is button down your processes end to end and really, really understand them. Because you literally won't unless you're immersed in it for not 25 years. It doesn't take that long, honestly. It's only taken long. Most people pick it up quicker.
Can businesses use technology to streamline the process though?
Absolutely, yeah. So if we talk about those processes, and this comes back to that point I was saying earlier on about this, perhaps 40 to 50% automation currently. So there is that automation within looking at a managed service or a software as a service, that kind of scenario. There is a level of automation. As I mentioned before, that the hype around it is they're completely automated. The reality is they can't. I say they can't be. So we're currently driving a project of where we think we'll achieve 90% automation, and that's through coming back to those processes and going, right, we understand that happens, that happens, and that happens. So therefore, the system needs to understand that as well. So a good system with good automation is absolutely key. And then thinking about your data sources as well. So where can you obtain the information from? So we, for example, we can obtain information direct out of open banking and payroll data. So often we can validate a reference before the candidate's even got to the point of submitting the form. You know, with the right data source around, obviously, right to work. Again, we're able to confirm an individual's right to work before they've even submitted the form. So we're doing that in real time. So I think they're the two things: automation with really good data sources plugged into it.
Cool. So I'm coming along through my questions pretty well here. So I'm just going to prompt those folks listening in that if you've got any questions, please make sure you submit them either in the Q&A or chat function so that I can put them to Matt and Dan. So I guess it's what everyone's asking right now over all sorts of topics: the economy, AI, tech, but everyone wants some insight into what happens next. So Matt, what do you see the future of screening looking like?
I think from looking at the landscape now, and one of the things that I've learned in this, and I guess any industry, I don't try and predict too far ahead, because something will happen that you didn't even expect. I mean, 5 years ago, no one was talking about AI, whereas now it's really on this. So AI will be a big driver. I think AI in our industry is too immature to really adopt heavily at the moment. We are looking at ways that it can be done. We have to balance that with making automated decisions, which obviously is not a great thing to do. But certainly the candidate experience we're seeing being improved significantly through AI and the way in which they interact. What we're going to move away from is, I think, the process of checking the same thing over and over again, and that will be supported by things like blockchain out there as well. There'll be huge, and there's a lot of people leading the field in that are trying to do elements of it and keep it within the blockchain. Until it's accepted widely and used widely, it's a bit of a challenge, but I think that's a real way forward for us. There'll be new data sources coming around. I mean, if you'd asked me 2 years ago, could I see me getting access to open banking data, direct access into payroll data, etc., things like that, I'd have said probably not. But here we are now. We're accessing it. We're doing it, which is great. And I think that bit I mentioned before about that drive towards true automation on there as well will be a big step change as well, where we can genuinely get to a system that, or a process that really is up to I don't think we'll ever be 100%, but at least let's get it as close as we can to the automation as well.
Yeah. So thank you both for some great insight and some really useful observations of your market and future state. That was great. We have a question from Stefan. With the ultimate risk pain of an unrecognised adverse finding lying with the end client, what are you seeing in the market around clients conducting their own screening? That's the end client.
Yeah. We've personally, I've seen no significant shift towards that. There are some clients that absolutely do prefer to conduct their own screening. I think we've got a number of clients that carry out all their own contractor screening, but have I seen a move en masse for it over the last 4 or 5 years? No. Do I think maybe it should sit there? Don't know is the answer to that. I don't think I have a significant opinion on where it sits. If it sits with the end client, they have better controls. Where what I have found, if it sits with the end client, it tends to slow the process slightly as well. So it has its good and bad points on there as well. But no, I haven't seen a significant shift. I don't know where the industry would like it to go. I'm sure they'd all like to go, I just don't want to deal with that anymore. That's the end client. Definitely, I don't think that's going to happen just yet, I'm afraid.
No, I think it comes down to those core functions as well, isn't it? What's the core function of your end customer? What's the core function of an outsource provider? What's the core function of a recruitment supplier? And quite often, as we know, which is why outsourcing in the last 20 years has exploded, is the fact that it's sometimes a lot cheaper and quicker to do it externally with experts than it is to have it in-house. That's just, the fact. Now, the hype is, and we've heard this on the grapevine, that there's some providers out there that say that they can complete checks in 24 hours. Is that even possible?
It is, and I think if we look at the strap lines, it normally says as little as 24 hours. So it is entirely possible. And when we talk about how that's achieved, that's not just a check, that is a full end-to-end compliance screening case. If we imagine that 5 years referencing criminal record, I don't know, sanctions checks, or direct ship checks, all of those in, then yes, I think our record on it is something like 36 minutes. We've managed to complete one end to end. That's a one-off. I'm not doing an SLA on that ever. But that's through data. It is just around about the data access. Now, we can do that so if we're looking at using open banking data, payroll banking data, it tends to be the referencing that drives the turnaround times now. Used to be the criminal record, is not the case anymore. So if we can use that data effectively, then yes, there can be incredibly quick turnaround times on that.
So just coming back to Stefan's point, which was about the end customer. So we sometimes deal with extremely complex requirements from a client who has a variety of needs. How do you deal with that?
I guess the key is your due diligence up front. Make sure that you understand in detail those requirements, and you should in every case never take it for granted. If I look over the years that I've been doing this, where I've been burnt, it's where I've made an assumption that it is a standard delivery, and invariably it absolutely turns out it's not, and they've got some small tweak in their process that upsets everything. So it's understanding that, and that comes back again to the point around the expertise. I know we work with a number of our clients, and we sit in on those conversations, and we drive that conversation because we know what we're asking for. And it's just about mapping the requirements. They can be hard to align sometimes, but invariably, occasionally you can push back on them as well and go, well, actually, do you need that? Why do you need that? And then ensure that the tech that you've got can manage that complexity as well, and deliver on those variable requirements. But yeah, even if we went to one single sort of, I guess, regulatory requirement, let's say airside, for example, which is quite a complex one, but every single airport around the UK has tweaked the requirements. So there isn't one with a standard, this is what the CAA want. It's all slightly different. So it can be complicated.
And then if you take that exact same scenario, and many of our providers work, as you know, on a global stage, then they might deal with the same client airside, like, I don't know, British Airways, but they'll have different requirements across many different airports globally. So it mushrooms, doesn't it, Matt?
Very, very complex, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Why do you think, so this is probably a little contentious, but why do you think some implementations, partnerships fail? Because we hear about that too.
So I guess you've got your typical reasons, poor planning, lack of communication, tech isn't compatible, but that's not very, I guess, unique to background checking and screening. If I think about unique reasons it does in our industry, then something that I've mentioned often, lack of expertise. And it really, the problem with background checking is it looks simple from the outside, so people think it's easy to do, but without the expertise, that's where it starts to fall over. And going back to that due diligence earlier on, not doing your due diligence properly, not really understanding the correct customer requirements, like we spoke about just there, Mel, about the variables across industries, across locations, exactly like that. And I shouldn't harp on this one, but believe in the automation hype. So many organisations believe that they're going to totally automate their pre-employment screening and then realise they're under-resourced on day one because they've not got the skills, expertise, or the people to actually deliver on it.
So, I I've just anybody got any last burning questions? Otherwise, of course, we'll give you some time back. But I just want to say, Matt, it's really refreshing to hear from you and Dan in a very open, authentic way. You've been really candid, and as I said earlier, very insightful, and as I said, it's refreshing, and I really thank you for your presentation. Let me just quickly go to the Q&A.
There's a couple in there, isn't there? I think.
Yes, there is. So I think, Toby, the difficulty with overseas checks is managing end client hiring manager expectations. It's proven difficult to manage these as an MSP because A, often we don't know the cost up front, and B, don't know the expected time to receive certain checks, which I know you talked to, Matt. How do you manage this with your clients? Are there industry guidelines, baselines we can refer to? It's like, yeah. Is there a get out of jail card on that one, Matt?
Unfortunately, so if we look at how we manage it, so the moment that we become aware that an overseas check is required, and again, we drive that process. So one of the first things that once a candidate gives us their information, within the first 2 hours, we've established their work history, where it was. We've established where they've lived, etc., where they've worked, and we can at that point go, we know that there's overseas requirements in this. And then within those 2 hours, we inform our clients and go, the cost implication to you is X and the time implication to you is X. So you would know literally up front that what that implication is going to be, how it's going to delay anything or something like that. So yeah, it's just again coming back to having that that reach globally in the knowledge. So I know, I don't know why I always pick on Azerbaijan. It just seems but, I know exactly what the cost is.
I think you enjoy saying the country.
I think I do, yeah. People actually ask me, Matt, do you know what the costing is Azerbaijan? I mean, the royal I, as in my team, we know what the cost is there. We know what the process is. We know what the turnaround times are out there. Plus, we also know if there's any instabilities within that region that are extending it at the moment. So, when Russia invaded Ukraine, we were very quick to go out to our clients and explain to them what that impact that would have on both their Russian and Ukrainian checks and any that around there. So if there's any around that, we know about that happening. So yeah, it's just about getting that communication out up front as quick as possible and giving you the tools you need to go back to your client.
Yeah, it's also having that caveat with the client, because very much you start a program, whether it be RPO or MSP, in one country, and then you extend it out into others. And when it is unknown, it's making sure the client understands the caveat that there is a different cost and a different structure, different SLA involved. So one other question from Helen. She just wants to cover that point again where we spoke to Dan with you about where an MSP can take on the screening of a supplier's candidate. And she wanted to understand how that sits from a GDPR point of view, because she felt that surely they are holding too much information on the individual when technically the supplier is the holder of that worker. And also when it comes to a supplier being audited on workers, they wouldn't have the info to provide as the MSP would.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the principle of it goes to your point that you were making before, Mel, which is it's just having horses for courses, having specialists delivering in those specialist areas. So recruiters to do the search and selection, screening provider to focus on screening, or a payroll provider to focus on payroll. So if I look at some examples where we've come in to facilitate that, we have the contractual chain down to the recruitment suppliers has changed. So the recruitment agencies can be paid on a margin only basis for the search and selection piece. And what Giant have done is sucked out all the heavy lifting, all the other operational complexity around managing that worker into our group, whether that's payroll, whether that's Matt's area on screening, whether that's funding requirements we've taken away. And initially when we did it, we anticipated maybe we were going to get reservations or pushback from the suppliers to go, oh, hang on a minute, you know, we're moving. And it's been the reverse. The feedback from the suppliers is, what, fantastic, I'm not in the contract chain, I don't have to worry about IR35 and AWR and all this other good stuff, and I'm still going to get paid my margin, and I don't have to invoice it, you're going to self-bill it to me. So it's been positively received, because those guys ultimately, they just want to crack on with doing the search and selection and deliver that. And that has then meant that from a candidate experience perspective, whether the workers are found directly by the MSP, whether it's a direct referral from the hirer, whether it's via a recruitment partner, the process is the same, the candidate experience is the same, and that is infinitely easier to benchmark and audit than necessarily having to go through with the suppliers. So fair point from Helen, but don't assume that the contractual structures always have to remain the same. You can adjust those.
Great, thank you. So I don't think we've got any other questions in Q&A or on the chat. So yeah, just want to say thanks so much, guys. It's really insightful, really informative, and mostly, you know, just really open. So thank you very much indeed for this afternoon, and to everyone out there for coming on and listening in. And yep, the recording of the session will be available on our resources page, or we can arrange to send that to you or any of your colleagues if you'd like. If you want to know any more information about Giant Screening, or indeed the wider Giant Group, as I said, they're a trusted partner of APSCo OutSource and indeed APSCo UK. So you can either come directly to us and we'll provide you with a direct intro, or, you know, reach out directly to either Dan or Matt. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. And yeah, have a good rest of the day, everybody, in this basking sunshine of autumn.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, thanks.